Okay. Now, I thought of a bunch of different ways that I could actually show this and go over the many different variables in a very fast manner to show you the principles of what defines professional photography. And there's only two things that do define it. One is composition, and the second one is light manipulation, mastery thereof. One thing that people don't do is they only see with their eyes, and they don't see what is potentially there. They take pictures, they don't make pictures. Let's use some diffusers and some reflectors and talk about what it is that you need to see that I'm almost certain that it is that you don't see. First, let's take a look at some hard light. Well, what is it that defines hard light as opposed to soft light? Well, it's the diffuse values between the specular and the shadow and the edge transition. That actual zone that exists, the diffuse values, it's like a hard light. It's like a bucket of water, whereas a translucent go-between is spreading the water around and giving a higher gradation or zone, to the areas between the speculars and the shadows. Now, what are the three things that we need to look at in any subject? And we're not talking about tabletop photography here with a shell. We're talking about faces, people, things, animals, baby, okay? I'm using this as an example, but it applies as perfectly to people as it does to tabletop photography and product photography. One is understanding the diffuse values, which gives the true tonality of the subject. What is the diffuse values? The diffuse values of a person's face, for example, is the true skin tone of what they represent as your eyes are adjusted. See, your camera's sensor and lens is not like your eyeballs. We go out into bright light, our eyes adjust to see the true tonality of what something is, but your camera doesn't work that way. The true tonality of this shell, for example, and it's very close in reflectance to human skin tones, is this middle brown section right here. Now, these are our speculars. This is the true tonality of the shell, and over here we have our shadows. Now, what are the three things that we need to understand? We need to understand the relationship between the speculars, the midtones, or the diffuse value, and thirdly, the shadows. We need to be able to control the speculars relative to the diffuse, and we need to be able to control the ratios and lighting that give definition to the shadows, the diffuse, and the speculars to give us the effect which controls much of composition. We need to be able to understand how to control and how to easily do it where it's become muscle memory in our brain to control the edge transition between the shadows to the midtones or diffuse, shadows to our midtones or diffuse, and the edge transition between the speculars and the midtones or diffuse. Okay? So how are we able to do that? And can we actually see with our eyes and understand what our camera sees or not what our eyes adjust to? Let me turn off this one light, which has got some hard light, and add some harder light, more hard light here. You see the difference between our speculars and our midtones? We have a high contrast ratio. We have a narrow zone between our speculars and our diffuse, and we also have a narrow zone between our shadows and our midtones or our diffuse value, or the true tonality of the shell is also applicable to a person's face. What is it that we're able to do? And this is how you layer light. Some people think that layering light is adding a secondary strobe. You have a main light as your primary, and then you have a secondary light, which would be your hair light, and a third light as a fill, and possibly a fourth light as a background light. But what if you only have one light to work with? And a lot of professional photographers only work with one light, and whether that's a studio strobe or whether it's the sun, same principle. Okay, now I've changed. Let me turn on my main light here. And this is applicable to constant lighting as it is to studio and strobe photography. The only difference is you can see it here, whereas with a studio strobe or a speed light, you're going to have to be able to perceive what it does, and yes, you're going to have to chimp on the back of your camera, which of course you need to expose properly. So now I've actually changed the ratio or zone between my speculars and my midtones or by diffuse, and my diffuse by adding a go between my main lighting and my subject. Well, that's fine. I've actually increased the zone between my midtones and my speculars, but now I have an issue with definition. This may be the lighting that you're going for if that's the compositional choice that you make. But what about using some of the spill light that is coming over the top of, depending on where you place the strobe, or say this is the sun? What about adding some specular definition. Now here we have low contrast on the subject, whether this is constant lighting or speed light photography or strobe photography. The result is the same. Just blink your eyes really fast and what you'll see is exactly what the camera will take. Now we're going to add some specular definition in contrast. Now you see the huge difference between this and this. Now we've given diffuse values not only between our speculars and our midtones, but also between our shadows and our diffuse. So the zone or edge transition between our shadows and our midtones, or our diffuse values, has been evened out, and the edge transition between our speculars and our midtones has been evened out. Now, whatever you want to do is what is valid. The point is that there is no perfect lighting. Now, there is some ugly lighting for a person's face, obviously so, unflattering, but whatever it is that you imagine in your mind is the compositional skills that you're going to have to develop. But the point is that you want to be able to arrive at a point where your imagination is immediately, imminently, and without forethought and calculation transferred from your imagination, your mind of the composition or what the client wants, into the photograph. By being able to understand how, if I have hard lighting, if I have bad... See, there is, and this is my quote, by the way, there is no such thing as bad lighting. There's only bad photographers. You can, when photography gives you lemon, you make lemonade. When, when you've got bad lighting and you deal with it, then you're taking pictures. You're not making pictures. I mean, I've got dozens of reflectors and gobos and diffusion panels around here for a reason. They are as important to lighting as the speed lights and strobes themselves. What about negative fill? Most people never talk about negative fill anymore. It's incredibly important. What about negative fill? Take a look at the shadow area on the left side of the shell here. It's equally applicable to a person's face. We also have the same gradation values and the basic same grayscale zone system values of this shell as a human face does. Now take a look at the left side here if I add some negative fill. How come nobody in the photography world talks about negative fill anymore? Here, 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 here. Negative fill. Why, this subtracts light. Now, the ancient Greeks understood one thing really damn clear, is that presence speaks as much as absence does. Okay? Now, I have a higher contrast ratio and a wider zone between my shadows and my diffuse, or the true midtone or tonality of the shell. I've given it contrast definition by diffusing my main light, diffusing my speculars, giving myself a larger edge transition or zone between my speculars and my midtones, but adding to that contrast by adding negative fill to the left side of the shell. Okay, now, instead of a silver reflector, this would be what a lot of people would use for baby portraiture. I have a white fill right here. I'm either using the hard light that actually comes over side, over top, whether it's the sun or a speed light, to fill my white reflector card here to give a soft, even gradation where I have diffuse values across the tonal range of the subject, both the midtones, the speculars, and the shadows. I have really low contrast between those three, and the gradation is rather large. This is a soft value. It renders images flat. It'll take the wrinkles out of ugly old women. This is what your clients pay you for. If you're going to do headshots, like, oh, here's an old woman with a lot of wrinkles. White reflector, please. You're going to remove those wrinkles. Because you know one thing that old women will not pay you for when it comes to a photograph is that if I take like a silver reflector here and then I give not only definition but extreme definition, there we go. Now we have hard edge contrast. If I give extreme definition to someone's wrinkles, it's like you took that old woman and you put 10 years on her. She's paying you to take 10 years off of her face, not put 10 years. Yeah, people generally pay you to take years off of their face, not years onto their face. Okay? And you want to be doing this. Now, okay, let's turn off this light for a second. remove our diffusion panel, which is just tracing paper. It's all about angling. That you can, now there's like 100 books in photography that are written on the use of one studio strobe or one speed light. How am I actually able to see where I have high contrast and a very narrow zone between my shadows and my diffuse, and a high zone, a narrow zone between my speculars and my diffuse? I have hard edge contrast here. If that's what I want and that's what the composition calls for, so that's fine. You will know how to add it and also where to place the illumination that gives definition to your subject. You always have to be thinking about translucence, transmission, reflectance, and how that gives definition to whatever it is that you're shooting. Not everything has to be blasted with diffuse light. What does the composition call for? Let me place the diffusion panel here. What does the composition call for? Now I'm going to add some specular definition to give depth and character to this. There we go. Now let me place my strobe. Whether it's constant lighting or strobe makes no difference. Here we go. That's lovely. Okay. Understand the difference between the specular. Listen up closely. If you understand nothing else in photography, you really do need to understand this. You need to understand what the speculars are, what the diffuse or midtones are of your subject, and what the shadows are of your subject. How do you control those as an afterthought? Do I use negative fill? Do I use a hard light reflection? Or do I use soft light reflection? Am I trying to remove wrinkles, or am I taking a picture of a dog and I want to give a hard edge contrast to the dog because that is what my mind... Do I want to add some negative fill and get higher definition to the body of the subject and add negative fill that actually adds to the drama or composition that's within my mind that I'm able to easily translate into where to place reflectors, whether they be negative fill, whether they be silver reflectors, whether they be gold reflectors for some evening illumination? How do you control the lighting? Only two things define professional photography. Okay? Composition and the ability to manipulate light with expertise. This is what defines being able to take pictures versus making pictures. You know, if you only work with what you've got, you know, I mean, do you know how small a little gobo reflector is? It's about the size of a dinner plate. Pops open about 4 feet wide. Incredibly important. I'm not saying you're going to take that on a street shoot and you're going to stick out a reflector disc on a homeless person and, you know, to pause to take the picture. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the portraiture shots, the stuff that you set up to create the stuff that you're paid for, or that which you are most interested in translating from your mind into the shot and making what is in your imagination a reality, is only the difference between being able to understand how you give definition between your speculars, your diffuse, and your shadows of your subject, and how wide or narrow those zones are that give it definition to express the composition within your mind that defines what it is that you are trying to create. You know, some of the, you know, you can have some really ugly shots that you're able to make beautiful simply by lighting control. I mean, the one thing that like hotel and real estate photographers are paid to do is to be able to control the light. They make an ugly, dumpy hotel look beautiful with the proper lighting. You can't stick a huge reflector up on a hotel. You can inside the room, obviously. You could change the perspective, the compression of what it is you're shooting. You make a tiny little dumpy hotel room look like it's gigantic. I'm going to throw on a 14mm lens and I'll make this tiny dumpy hotel room look enormous. I'm going to add the proper lighting and make it look spacious. You need to be thinking about contrast, what gives definition to what it is you're shooting, and how and where to place these to change the hard light and the soft light in your shot. The hard light and the soft light is just the difference of the diffuse values between the speculars and the shadows and the edge gradations and those gradation zones, whether they be narrow or whether they be wide. There is no right answer. The only right answer is the composition which is within your brain to make manifest in an expedient and fast manner to make the shot come out on your camera exactly how it came out inside your mind between your two ears. You've got two cameras to work with. The camera that's within your brain between your two ears that you want to make manifest, and then the camera in your hands and your ability to manipulate the light that is expressed by that camera to give definition to the composition. So only thing you're trying to do in professional photography is match the one camera in your brain up to the camera in your hands. And when you can do that, then you're happy, you're making money, you're experiencing what it is to control light. Now, so far as the compositional quality, that's another matter altogether. Some people never develop those skills. Some people don't care. They only see with their eyes and they take pictures. If that makes them happy, that's fine. That's not invalid. But what defines a professional photographer is the ability to manipulate that light, not just see what is there. Oh, look at this harsh light. Oh my God, you know, the sun is out at 3 p.m. She looks like a demon. This gorgeous woman looks like a demon. Well, you know, okay, so the sun is out. Let's take a diffusion panel and stick it there. Okay, you don't always need assistance to do everything. And let's add some specular definition to this side of her face to give her beauty and definition. Oh, okay, great. You know where to place these, the proximity to place these, how to manipulate hard light and soft light, control the specular, the diffuse, and the shadows of your subject. It doesn't matter what it is. A baby, a dog, a tabletop product photo, a corporate shoot. All the lighting controls the mood and the composition. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Catch you later.